The first thing I heard was the crack of glass against china. Then my 9-year-old daughter hit the hardwood floor. "She's not family," Harold Whitmore thundered, pointing at the front door as though he were throwing out a stranger instead of a little girl. "Get her out of my house." The room froze. My daughter, Lily, looked up from the floor with wide, confused eyes. One small hand rubbed her shoulder where my father-in-law had shoved her. The pastel Easter dress she'd proudly picked that morning was wrinkled, and one white shoe had slipped off. Nobody moved. Not Harold's daughters. Not his sons. Not his grandchildren. Not even the people who had watched my late husband promise that Lily would always belong. I dropped to my knees beside her. "Sweetheart, are you hurt?" She swallowed hard and whispered, Did I do something bad?" Before I could answer, Harold lifted his water glass as though nothing unusual had happened. "I said remove her," he barked. "This table is for family." For years, everyone had accepted his voice as the final word. They had watched him control birthdays, Thanksgivings, Christmas, every inheritance discussion, every family decision. No one challenged Harold Whitmore. Not until that Easter. I stood slowly, helping Lily to her feet before brushing the dust from her dress. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten him. I didn't argue. I simply met his eyes and said 5 quiet words. I brought the original agreement. His face emptied of color. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers. It exploded across the dining room floor. For the first time in decades, the most powerful man in the Whitmore family looked terrified. And every pair of eyes turned toward him instead of me. The silence that followed felt heavier than the broken crystal scattered across the hardwood. Harold stared at me without blinking. His hand remained suspended in the air where the glass had been only seconds earlier. Around the dining table, nobody seemed to know whether to sit down or leave. Outside, children who were too young to understand anything laughed as they searched the yard for brightly colored Easter eggs. Inside, it felt as though the entire house had stopped breathing. I squeezed Lily's hand. She leaned against me without saying another word. Her eyes never left Harold. He finally cleared his throat. "You're bluffing," he said, though the confidence that usually filled his voice was noticeably absent. I answered quietly, "Am I?" His jaw tightened. One of his daughters, Margaret, forced an awkward laugh. "Oh, goodness," she said. "Let's all calm down. Easter isn't the time for drama." "Drama?" She called a frightened child, lying on the floor. "Drama." Another relative quickly began collecting broken pieces of glass, pretending that cleaning was somehow more urgent than acknowledging what everyone had witnessed. Harold adjusted his jacket. "Sit down," he ordered. No one immediately obeyed. That alone was unusual. For years, his commands had ended every disagreement before they began. I looked around the room. Some people stared at their plates. Others suddenly found the centerpiece fascinating. No one looked at Lily. No one except me. I knelt beside her again. "Can you move your arm?" She nodded. "My shoulder hurts a little." I gently checked where Harold had grabbed her. A faint red mark was already beginning to appear beneath the sleeve of her dress. My stomach twisted. Not because of the bruise. Because every adult in that room had decided protecting Harold's comfort mattered more than protecting a child. As I stood again, memories surfaced one after another. The Christmas Harold refused to include Lily in the family photo because she had joined too late. The Thanksgiving, when he'd instructed relatives to buy presents for the real grandchildren first. The birthday party, where he'd introduced Lily as Daniel's charity project. Each time someone had whispered the same excuse afterward. "You know how Harold is. He doesn't mean it. Don't make things worse." I'd believed keeping peace was the only way Lily could still have a relationship with her father's family. Standing there that Easter afternoon, Watching my daughter quietly wipe tears from her face, I realized peace had never existed. Only silence had. Harold finally found his voice again. His eyes locked onto mine. What agreement could possibly frighten me? I didn't answer. I simply rested my hand on the leather satchel hanging beside my chair. His eyes followed the movement. And for the first time since I'd known him, Harold Whitmore looked afraid of what was inside. Harold recovered faster than anyone expected. He straightened his jacket, glanced around the room, and spoke with the cold authority that had ruled the Whitmore family for decades. Everyone sit down. Lunch is getting cold. A few chairs scraped against the hardwood. Slowly, reluctantly, people obeyed. It was almost instinct. Years of conditioning were difficult to break. I remained standing. Lily stayed beside me, holding my hand with both of hers. Harold looked directly at me. "You've embarrassed yourself enough, Brina." His voice was calm again. "If you apologize now, perhaps we can still salvage Easter." Before I could answer, Margaret turned toward me with an anxious smile. "Please, Brina," she whispered. "Just let it go. Grandpa lost his temper." Another aunt nodded. "Don't upset him anymore." I looked around the table. Not one person mentioned Lily. Not one person asked if she was hurt. Only whether Harold was upset. I lowered myself beside my daughter. "Come with me, sweetheart." Without another word, we walked out of the dining room. No one stopped us. No one followed. The upstairs guest bedroom was quiet, except for Lily's uneven breathing. I helped her sit on the edge of the bed. "Can I see your shoulder?" She nodded. I carefully moved the sleeve of her Easter dress. The outline of Harold's fingers had already begun to darken into a bruise. I reached into my purse for a small first aid pouch. As I placed a cool compress against her shoulder, Lily stared at the floor. For several seconds, she didn't speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Mom." I looked at her. "If I'm not family." She hesitated. Why did Dad always call me his daughter? The question stole every word I had. I sat beside her. "When your dad adopted you," I said softly, "he wasn't giving you a place in our family. You already had one. He was making sure the law recognized what his heart already knew." Lily looked up. "He always said nobody could change that." "They can't." "But Grandpa said." "I know what Grandpa said." She searched my face. "So, was Dad wrong?" I gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "No. Your father never broke a promise. Daniel." Even after 3 years, saying his name in my mind still felt like opening a door that should never have been closed. I remembered the evening we finalized Lily's adoption. Daniel had carried her asleep from the car to the house. He kissed her forehead before turning to me. "If anything ever happens to me." I'd interrupted him immediately. "Don't." He smiled sadly. "Just listen." There had been something unusually serious in his eyes. "My father will smile at first. He'll tell everyone he accepts her. But one day," Daniel had paused, "he'll try to erase her." I laughed nervously. "Daniel, that's impossible." "He wouldn't." "I hope you're right." Then he'd walked into his office. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a thick brown folder. "If that day ever comes." He placed it in my hands. "Don't lose this." I'd asked what was inside. He smiled. "The reason Lily will always belong." At the time, I thought he was simply protecting us from unlikely possibilities. I had no idea he was preparing for exactly this day. A knock sounded at the bedroom door. It wasn't Harold. It was 16-year-old Ethan, Daniel's youngest cousin. He opened the door only halfway. I just wanted to check on Lily." Lily managed a small smile. "I'm okay." Ethan noticed the old leather folder resting beside my purse. His expression immediately changed. His eyes widened. "You actually brought it." I looked at him carefully. "You know what this is?" He hesitated. "I know Uncle Daniel told my dad about it. He said if Grandpa ever crossed a line." Ethan stopped himself. I shouldn't say any more. Before I could ask another question, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ethan quickly stepped back. "I'm sorry." Then he disappeared. His reaction confirmed something important. Daniel hadn't trusted only me. Someone else in the family knew enough to recognize the folder. From downstairs came Harold's unmistakable voice. He wasn't shouting now. He was making phone calls. His tone was clipped. "Urgent. Get over here immediately. No, today. I don't care that it's Easter." Another pause. "Bring every file." I exchanged a glance with Lily. He wasn't acting like a man calling a bluff. He sounded like someone trying to contain a disaster. A few minutes later, whispers drifted upstairs. Family members were gathering near the staircase. They say Harold called his attorney. On Easter. What could Brina possibly have? I've never seen him like this. I rested my hand on the locked folder. Daniel had warned me that someday Harold would reveal who he truly was. That day had finally arrived. The bedroom door swung open. Harold stood there. His face was composed again, but his eyes betrayed something they never had before. Fear. He looked directly at the folder, then back at me. "You have one chance," he said evenly. "Hand it over." Harold didn't wait for my answer. He stepped into the bedroom, leaving the door open behind him as if he expected everyone downstairs to hear whatever came next. "You're making a very serious mistake, Brina." I stood between him and Lily. "The mistake was yours." His eyes narrowed. "You've spent 3 years living off this family's generosity." I almost laughed. Living off his generosity. I'd never accepted $1 beyond what Daniel had already arranged for Lily before he died. I paid my own mortgage. I worked full-time. I built our life without asking Harold for anything. Yet he spoke as though everything I had belonged to him. "I've asked for nothing from you," I replied. "You took my son's name," he snapped. "That was enough." Before I could answer, Margaret and several relatives appeared in the hallway. "What is going on?" someone asked nervously. Harold turned toward them with practiced confidence. "She's trying to manipulate this family." He pointed directly at me. "She waited until Easter to create a spectacle because she thinks grief gives her special privileges." Several relatives exchanged uncertain looks. One uncle nodded automatically. "Harold's right. Daniel wouldn't have wanted this." Another cousin quietly murmured, "Maybe everyone should just calm down." The familiar pattern was unfolding again. Harold accused. Everyone else protected him. Normally. Not today. I took Lily's hand. "Come downstairs." Harold smirked. "Good, maybe you've come to your senses." We walked back into the dining room. Half-eaten Easter lunch still sat untouched across the long oak table. Broken crystal had been swept away, but the tension remained. Every chair was occupied. Every face was turned toward us. Harold stood at the head of the table like a judge, preparing to deliver a sentence. "Tell them," he demanded. "Tell everyone why you're threatening this family." I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I looked around the room. At Daniel's sisters. His cousins. His uncles. The people who had celebrated every Easter with him. Then I asked a single question. Who remembers Daniel's final Easter? Silence. Real silence. Not fearful silence. Reflective silence. Finally, Aunt Evelyn slowly lifted her hand. "I do." Her voice trembled. He invited only immediate family into the library after lunch. Across the table, another uncle frowned as memories returned. There was paperwork. I remember signing something as a witness. Margaret blinked. So did I. I honestly forgot about that. A cousin leaned forward. Didn't Daniel say he wanted everyone present before he signed anything? More heads slowly nodded. The memories were returning. Harold's expression hardened. Those papers were meaningless. I looked at him calmly. Were they? Aunt Evelyn studied Harold carefully. You left the room. Harold answered immediately. I had business calls. No, she said quietly. You were angry. The room shifted. Not physically. Emotionally. People were no longer looking to Harold for answers. They were looking at each other, trying to remember. Uncle Robert rubbed his forehead. I remember Daniel asking everyone to stay. He said what he was signing affected the future of the family. Margaret looked toward Harold. You told us it was just estate housekeeping. Harold didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me. What exactly are you trying to prove? I rested one hand on the leather folder. Only one thing. The room waited. My husband insisted those documents be properly witnessed that afternoon. Gasps rippled around the table. I deliberately stopped there. I did not explain what the documents contained. I did not open the folder. I gave them only enough truth to realize they had forgotten something important. Harold understood exactly what I was doing. I was letting their own memories weaken his version of history. His composure finally cracked. Enough. His voice echoed through the dining room. Everyone leave. Nobody moved. I said leave. Still no one stood. For the first time, anyone could remember. Harold had given an order that wasn't obeyed. Lily squeezed my hand. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel's oldest niece quietly stood. She walked away from Harold. Without saying a word, she stopped beside Lily. A teenage cousin joined her. Then another. Within seconds, 4 of Daniel's younger relatives had gathered around my daughter. Not dramatically. Not defiantly. Simply, protectively. Harold stared in disbelief. The grandchildren he had always expected to follow him, without question had chosen Lily instead. Family loyalty had begun to shift. He saw it happening. So did everyone else. His face flushed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He pressed one contact. David, he said sharply when the call connected. I don't care where you are. His eyes never left me. Bring every trust document. He ended the call. There, he announced confidently. When my attorney gets here, this little performance ends. I met his stare without blinking. Please do. Less than 20 minutes later, the front door opened. A middle-aged attorney carrying 3 thick binders stepped inside, looked around the silent dining room, and immediately realized this was no ordinary Easter gathering. The attorney paused just inside the doorway. His gray overcoat was still buttoned against the spring chill, and 3 thick binders rested beneath one arm. He took in the untouched Easter meal, the strained faces around the table, and Harold standing rigid at the head of it. I came as quickly as I could, he said carefully. Harold, what's happened? Harold pointed toward me without hesitation. She's making claims about documents that don't exist. The attorney's eyes shifted to me. Then to the worn leather folder, resting on the table beside my hand. He frowned. I think, he said evenly, before anyone makes another accusation, we should see whatever Mrs. Carter brought. Harold's jaw tightened. There is nothing worth seeing. The attorney looked back at him. If you're certain of that, then there shouldn't be any harm in reviewing it. No one spoke. Every chair remained occupied. No one reached for their food. The Easter lunch had become something else entirely. A reckoning. Harold forced a short laugh. Fine. He gestured toward me. Show everyone your little collection of papers. His confidence sounded rehearsed, not genuine. I slowly placed the leather folder on the table. For a moment, my fingers rested on the brass clasp. I remembered Daniel handing it to me years ago. Promise me something. What? If my father ever tries to pretend Lily isn't my daughter. You'll open this. Only then. At the time, I had laughed at the idea. Now I understood why he'd made me promise. I released the clasp. The folder opened. Inside sat several neatly protected documents. Behind them rested a sealed handwritten letter in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. The attorney leaned forward. May I? I nodded. He carefully lifted the first document. Within seconds, his expression became noticeably more serious. He adjusted his glasses. This is an original notarized instrument. His eyes moved across the signatures. Then he stopped. He looked directly at Harold. These are your signatures. Harold folded his arms. I've signed thousands of documents. Perhaps. The attorney continued reading. But this signature was witnessed and notarized. He picked up the second document. And so was this one. Across the table, Aunt Evelyn leaned closer. So Daniel really did have everyone witness something. The attorney nodded slightly. It appears he did. Harold interrupted sharply. Read the date. The attorney did. Easter Sunday, 3 years before Daniel's death. Margaret slowly covered her mouth. I was there. So was I, Uncle Robert whispered. I remember signing as a witness. One by one, the memories returned. Not because I reminded them. Because the documents did. The attorney carefully laid the papers flat across the dining table. I'll need a few minutes. He compared signatures. Checked the notary seal. Reviewed witness acknowledgments. No one interrupted him. Even Harold remained silent. Only the soft turning of paper broke the stillness. Lily stood beside me without saying a word. I wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders. She leaned against me. Not hiding. Just waiting. Finally, the attorney looked up. These documents appear authentic. Harold immediately stepped forward. Appear. The attorney held up one finger. I said appear. There is one remaining section that determines whether these provisions were properly incorporated. Harold's confidence returned. There. He pointed at the papers. I told you. They're incomplete. I said nothing. Instead, I reached into the folder once more. There was one more item Daniel asked me never to separate. I slid a final notarized attachment across the table. The attorney's eyebrows lifted. I wasn't expecting this. Harold's face drained of color again. You. His voice caught. Where did you get that? I kept exactly what Daniel entrusted to me. The attorney attached the final pages to the earlier documents and began reading carefully. No one moved. Even the children outside seemed strangely quiet through the closed windows. Several relatives exchanged nervous glances. Uncle Robert finally broke the silence. I owe you an apology, Brina. I looked at him. I should have spoken up years ago. Margaret lowered her eyes. So should I. Another cousin quietly admitted. We all knew Grandpa treated Lily differently. We just... He stopped. We were afraid. Afraid of losing financial help. Afraid of being excluded. Afraid of becoming Harold's next target. I looked around the table. This hadn't only happened to Lily. Harold's control had shaped every relationship in the room. He had ruled with approval and punished independence. The room was finally beginning to admit it aloud. Harold slammed his palm against the table. Daniel misunderstood everything. He was emotional. He wasn't thinking clearly. The attorney didn't even look up. He continued reading. Harold's breathing became noticeably heavier. The final page turned. The attorney stopped. His eyes remained fixed on the document for several long seconds. Then he slowly removed his glasses. He looked directly at Harold. No anger. No sympathy. Only certainty. He placed one hand on the final page. Then he said quietly, "This changes everything." No one spoke. The attorney's words seemed to hang over the dining room like the silence that had followed Lily's fall. Harold was the first to recover. "What exactly changes?" he demanded. The attorney folded the final page neatly onto the stack before looking around the table. Everything Mr. Whitmore believed he could control. He rested his hand on the documents. 3 years before Daniel passed away, he proposed an amendment to the Whitmore family trust. Harold interrupted. "I remember the discussion." The attorney nodded. "You remember the discussion." He tapped the notarized page. "But this proves you also approved it." Every eye turned toward Harold. The attorney continued. "These signatures, combined with the witness acknowledgments and the trust amendment, legally recognize Lily Carter as Daniel Whitmore's permanent heir for purposes specifically outlined in the family trust." Harold shook his head. "No." The denial came almost instinctively. "No, that isn't what I intended." The attorney answered calmly. "Intent is difficult to argue against a signed, witnessed, notarized agreement." He slid the final page toward Harold. "You signed every required section." Harold stared at his own signature. His hands began to tremble. The attorney continued explaining. "Mr. Whitmore, the trust amendment did more than acknowledge Lily as family." He paused. "It permanently protected her beneficiary status." Harold's face hardened. "I revoked that." "You attempted to." The attorney shook his head. "But this agreement specifically states that Daniel's adopted child cannot be removed by unilateral action." A murmur spread around the table. Margaret looked from the documents to Harold. "You told us Daniel never finished the paperwork." Harold remained silent. Uncle Robert slowly sank back into his chair. "You knew." Harold still said nothing. "You let us believe Lily had no place in this family." Aunt Evelyn covered her mouth. "My God." She looked toward Lily. "All these years." Lily instinctively stepped closer to me. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was simply trying to understand. The attorney carefully opened Daniel's handwritten letter. "I believe Daniel intended this to be read only if there was ever a dispute." He looked toward me. "Would you like me to read it?" I nodded. He unfolded the letter. "If you're reading this," he began, "then my greatest fear came true." No one moved. "My father may someday try to decide that blood matters more than love." Harold closed his eyes. "If he does, remind Lily that she was my daughter the day I chose her, not the day anyone else approved." Lily's eyes filled with tears. The attorney continued. "Family is built by commitment, not permission. No one, not even my father, has the right to erase my child." The room became impossibly quiet. "Brina, if you're standing there alone, know this. You never broke this family. You protected it." The attorney lowered the letter. No one spoke. There was nothing left to argue. Lily tugged gently on my sleeve. "Mom." I knelt beside her. She searched my face before asking the question that had been sitting in her heart all afternoon. "So," she swallowed, "I still belong." Before I could answer, someone else did. Daniel's younger sister, Claire, walked across the room. She knelt in front of Lily. Her own eyes were wet. You always belonged. She opened her arms. If you'll let me. Lily stepped into the embrace. Claire held her tightly. I'm so sorry. One after another, the rest of Daniel's family approached. Aunt Evelyn crouched beside Lily. I should have stopped him. Uncle Robert nodded. I should have spoken years ago. Margaret wiped away tears. I kept telling myself staying quiet would keep the family together. She looked at Harold. It only protected the wrong person. Several relatives admitted the same thing. They hadn't stayed silent because Harold was right. They had stayed silent because they were afraid. Afraid of losing financial help. Afraid of being cut out of holidays. Afraid of becoming the next person Harold rejected. For the first time, they said it out loud. And once they did, his control disappeared. Harold looked around the room. No one defended him. No one repeated his excuses. No one even looked toward him for direction. He was standing exactly where he had always stood, at the head of the table. But the authority that had surrounded him for decades was gone. He turned to his attorney. Fix this. The attorney quietly closed the binders. There is nothing to fix. He met Harold's eyes. My responsibility is to explain the law. He glanced toward Lily. And the law is very clear. He gathered his papers. I cannot support any effort to deny her rights under this agreement. Harold stared after him as the attorney walked toward the front door. The man he'd expected to rescue his authority had instead confirmed its limits. The weeks that followed changed the Whitmore family in ways no holiday ever had. The trust was updated to reflect Daniel's original amendment exactly as it had been signed. Lily's beneficiary status was formally acknowledged in every required record. No further challenge was made. Not because Harold accepted it, because he couldn't successfully dispute what he had already signed. Family gatherings gradually changed. Instead of waiting for Harold to host every holiday, relatives began inviting one another into their own homes. Conversations became easier. Children laughed more. People stopped worrying about saying the wrong thing. Harold attended fewer gatherings. When he did, he was no longer the person everyone watched before speaking. He was simply another guest. The following Easter, our home was full before noon. Children ran through the backyard with baskets in their hands. Lily led the egg hunt with her cousins, laughing so hard she could barely give directions. Inside, Daniel's framed photograph rested on the mantel. Fresh lilies stood beside it. Claire smiled as she watched the children through the window. He would have loved this. I smiled back. He already knew it would happen. She looked at me. What do you mean? I glanced toward the old leather folder, resting safely on a bookshelf. Daniel never trusted fear. He trusted the truth. Outside, Lily looked toward the house. Mom. I stepped onto the porch. What is it? She grinned. You coming? I looked at the family gathered across the yard. No one was excluded. No one was afraid. No one had to earn the right to belong. I walked down the steps and joined them. Because Daniel had been right all along. The 5 words that shattered Harold's control didn't start a family war. They finally ended one.